Hey, Sarah. Sarah's actually a friend of mine
Oh, fun.
in Northern Virginia. And then my friend Tim is on here. Tim is basically my BFF, really. So he can tell you some stories.
Great. I know to ask him then.
Well, I think you've already done a good job asking me questions.
Awesome. Welcome, everyone. We're going to get started in just a few minutes. We're going to let some more folks trickle in. But maybe if you want to share in the chat, like one word that for what you're feeling right now, how you're coming into this session, or like multiple words, but it's sometimes fun to challenge yourself to one. Hungry. I super relate to that feeling.
Yeah, very nice.
Yeah, I ate a snack before this because I was like, this isn't going to work out if I'm hungry.
That would have been a good idea. I did not eat a snack before this.
Yay, excited. I'm excited too. So fun. Well, I think we're going to give it until 4:05 for folks to trickle in, and then we'll get started. So if you don't already gather all your ingredients, get a snack, as we were just discussing, if you need one, some water, and we'll get started at 4:05.
I feel like I'm in a like one of those 1990s high school movies all of a sudden. The music's very like poppy. Not a criticism, I like it. I'm down. I may have dated myself a little bit too, but you know.
Never. Oh, there's Andrew. Hi, Andrew. Welcome.
Hey.
Andrew, we're writing in the chat one word for how we're feeling right now, getting us into the space. You changed your name to excited. Hi, Lindsay. Awesome. All right, we're gonna give it one more minute and then we're gonna dive in. I definitely think this is a 90s movie vibe. I totally agree with you.
Right?
Yeah.
I'm down. Not mad about it.
All right, Shauna, if we could turn down the music, we'll get started. Awesome. Hi, welcome everyone. Really excited to see you all here. I'm Molly. I use they, them, and she, her pronouns, and I am the Northwest Community Manager at JDC Entwine. So currently in the Bay Area. You are in my very sunny sunroom right now. I am super excited to introduce this segment for a number of reasons. The first is because we are launching a new series at Entwine called EntwineNosh, where we're going to be exploring the mosaic of Jewish experience through the lens of food, which I don't know about you, but I love to eat, and I am super excited to get to see what global recipes we're going to uncover together. So our first guest on this segment is one of my favorite humans and a dear friend, Angel, who's going to be showing us how to make his signature challah recipe, which we'll send you his Instagram info, but there's a new loaf every week, so you'll want to check that out. And so just to dive in, and also just to explain like how we're going to be going through this segment actually, before we dive in. So we're gonna do a little bit of conversation and cooking. So Angel's gonna walk us through his recipe, and at certain moments in time, there's pauses. We're waiting for yeast to rise. We're waiting for our bread dough to rise. And I'm gonna ask Angel the hard-hitting, deep, emotional questions that are weighing on both of our hearts right now. And so we're just gonna go along for the ride. Also, Angel and I are mildly obsessed with each other, so you might also just experience us having banter the whole time, and we hope you enjoy that as much as we will. So to dive in, Angel, why don't you tell us about yourself and what you're up to right now?
Sure, happy to. And I would say that mildly obsessed with you is an understatement. But no, I'm Angel Alvarez-Mapp. I used to live in the Bay Area until 2 weeks before COVID pandemic world started. I moved to Los Angeles, and now I've been in my apartment for a very, very long time, like many of you. In my day job, I'm the Director of Programs and Operations for the Jews of Color Initiative. And what we do is grant making, education, and research specifically around the Jews of Color topic and community, and we work to build the field for Jews of color throughout the country. And what am I up to right now? You know, these last few weeks, man, have been a doozy. You know, we professionally, they've been really crazy, right? We had fun. If you're in the Jewish world, you've seen a lot of articles questioning the research that the Jews of Color Initiative did. This was 5 weeks ago, I think now, or 5 years ago. It's hard to say. And then we had the murder of George Floyd and everything that's come out of that. And it's been a challenging couple of weeks, professionally, personally. And you know, the one thing that I will say, and this is not scripted, is that the thing that always grounds me at the end of the week is actually baking challah. Like it's my little like meditative way to end the week, move into Shabbat and forget about everything that happened. Meanwhile, also know that it's about to start happening again the following week. Yeah, so that's sort of what I'm up to, you know, finding ways to stay grounded in COVID.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. And like a lot of the themes that you emerged, I'm excited to dig a little bit deeper into them in our questions. But I know that we have a first step that we should probably start with before we dive
Probably.
even deeper. Yeah, so take us away.
That was a great segue. For this particular step, the very first thing you need to do in baking your challah, in preparing for your challah, is, well, at least with my recipe, is getting the yeast to sort of activate and start, you know, fermenting and getting happy. I like to think of the yeast as like getting a little jazzed up. Later in the process, I'll tip my screen down so you can actually see what's happening. But right now, just know that there's a standing mixer here. And then the recipe that went out makes 2 really massive challah. Since I'm not hosting massive party this week, I've cut it down into a third of it, which makes 2, like, I would say 2 pretty nice size chalot, about this size. So for that, I end up using 2 teaspoons of the yeast that I toss in here, and then an 1/8 cup of sugar that I'll toss in. And then this is the one thing I do need to step away for, but it's the water. And the water is kind of an interesting moment here because it needs to be warm enough to dissolve the sugar, but not too warm that it kills the yeast. I've been baking challah for a long time, and trust me, dead yeast is not something you want to try to play with because it just looks sad. It just like looks like, you know, brownish water. So what I've done, it's not scientific. I think I cook like my mother, where I'm just kind of like, well, you know, it's like what I would think of as lukewarm tea. And so I let the hot water run a little bit while I try to like not have dead air and keep it interesting for all of you. All right, so I'll do a 1/2 cup of warm water. And then I pour that in with the yeast and the sugar. And then of course, the fun part is the yeast doesn't want to do anything until you agitate it, like many of us. And so what I'll do with the whisk attachment on, or you could do this just by hand with the whisk. And I was right before we started, joking with Molly, I've been baking challah with a stand mixer for a very, very, very long time. It's a gift that my mother gave me that was like probably the best gift I've ever received from anyone. But last weekend I had to make challah by hand, and you know, it was a workout for sure. So I'll keep this going. It doesn't have to whisk for a long time. In the mixer, I whisk it for about, I don't know, 10, 15 seconds until there's like a little froth happening in the bath, which we've gotten there. And so now what we do is we actually just let it sit here for about 10 minutes. And what'll happen is, and I'll show you this when we get there, is right now, actually I should show you a before and after. The mixture just looks like water that is a little brown. I don't know if you guys can see that really well. And there's like slight bubbles on top. And when we come back to it in about 10 minutes, you'll see that it's actually sort of froth up. It's kind of, it'll have like a foamy dome to it. And the best way to describe it is it'll actually smell like bread before doing any of the other steps. So it's kind of an exciting part here. So yeah, so now we just wait.
Awesome, cool. Well, while we wait, I'm gonna ask you some invasive questions, naturally. I'm curious if you could tell us just a little bit about your Jewish journey and the role that food has played in it, in your Jewish journey and also just in your life in general.
Oh, that's a great question. I think for many of us, especially anybody in the Jewish world or anybody ethnic of anything really, there's always a smell, there's always a flavor, there's always I used to go to grandma's house for whatever the event was, and like she always made the, whatever it was. So I think for me, it's integral, right? Like I think about moments throughout my life by what I was eating at the time. Now, full disclosure, I definitely am a food nerd. And like not a foodie, I think that's a little pretentious, but food nerd. And so like, I'll remember like, oh, I was in this place at this time and I had this like peach thing and it was so sweet and it was so whatever. And I think personally, food is super instrumental. Like my mother and I spent all of our time together in the kitchen. And it was funny, as an adult, I would go home to visit. And like, honestly, it was as if no other room in my parents', suburban house. It's a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom suburban house. And like, I think I left the kitchen to go to sleep and to use the bathroom. And that was about it. My mom and I just hung out and we cooked and baked and like, all the things. So I think it's instrumental. And I would say in my Jewish journey, what's been fascinating is, so I converted, back in 2002 now. And I'm very close to reaching the moment in time where I've been a Jew longer than I haven't been a Jew, which is that's a whole different story, I think. But it was interesting. Thanks, but it was interesting because like I converted and, it was a very traditional conservative conversion and like everything was very Ashkenazi. I'm not dissing Ashkenazi cuisine or anything, but I was like, gefilte fish is fine. I mean, I don't think so, but some people think it's fine. And like matzo ball soup and the chicken broth is fine, but like it doesn't feel like the food I grew up eating, right? Like I was a kid who was always jealous of the other kids because they got a peanut butter and cheese sandwich. And I had like roasted chicken, rice, beans, and like a salad, which today is great. But at the time, you're like 6, you just want a sandwich. So I think food is everything in my world.
So is there like a specific dish that best represents your Jewish identity?
Oh, a specific dish. I would say, and I think you and I talked about this just on a friend level, I would say the matzo ball soup that I make for Passover, for my Seders, is probably the Jewish food that best describes my Jewish journey and my relationship to it. And I say Jewish food in air quotes because like we have to understand that Jewish food for somebody who came from Poland is very different from somebody who came from, Morocco or Spain or Mexico. So like, Jewish food, whatever we want to call that. So my matzo ball soup is not your Bubby's matzo ball soup, I guess I would say. I make the matzo balls very similar to like most people. The difference is my matzo ball soup has saffron and this other thing called sofrito, which it's like basically cooked down red, green bell peppers, onions, garlic, and obviously, because I love it, more saffron. And so you end up with this like aromatic and like lively matzo ball soup, like one that I don't think, well, I can tell you, I have not had one like this anywhere in the Jewish world that I've traversed. And I would say that's the food that best describes my relationship and my Jewish food, right? It marries my Latin side with like my newfound, well, not so newfound Ashkenazi Jewish side.
I love that. I remember when we were talking about your like delicious matzo ball soup, and I was like, yeah, my family recipe is like the box from the supermarket. It's been passed down from generation to generation. And the other thing that I'm like sitting with and thinking about is when we talked about this too, like the role that your mom and like your relationship with your mom has played in evolving some of those Ashkenazi recipes and Jewish food, for lack of a better word. So I'm curious if you want to just like say a little bit more about that too.
Yeah, I mean, so I think let me back up, how to answer this. So basically my mother plays a role in everything that is Angel Alvarez-Mapp. She passed away almost 3 years ago now. And so like, it's even more meaningful now to like have these food connections. But I just remember like every time we were in the kitchen, my mom would be cooking whatever. And like, there's no recipe. Like I've been actually realizing that I should have talked to her about some food dishes before, but you know, it's fine, I'll figure it out. But it was always like, oh, I put some of this, I put some of this, I put some of this. It's a little bland, let me add some of this, add some of this. And so I don't know, she and I never really talked about like my Jewish food together. Although I did make her my brisket once, which is not like, I mean, it is as like traditional Ashkenazi, like, and I mean like 1950s when Jews finally moved to the suburbs kind of brisket. I love it, it's really good, but it's not, but I don't know, it's not spicy or anything. But I made her that and she was like, oh, this is interesting. But I think I always channel her thinking and her method of like cooking. And it's fascinating because like I've been obsessed with food shows as a kid. Like I actually should have started by saying thank you for giving me my moment to be like Jacques Pepin and Julia Childs. Like this is like so wonderful for me. But like I remember, you know, you watch the shows and the chefs with all this training are like, and then you do this and then you build the flavors and you like, and they have all this, you know, education and knowledge in order to be able to do that. Meanwhile, my mother, who was not a chef, just kind of understood how to build flavors in an interesting way. And so like I found, now that I'm an adult and really understanding cooking more, like the steps that she would take to cook something are really fascinating, because now I'm like, oh, that's why she did the onions first and this last. Like that makes total sense. So that's I would say the way that I channel my mother into my Jewish food.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, just really sweet. I think because this is Entwine and, you know, global is part of our mission, I'm curious to just talk a little bit about how food, like what are some experiences that stand out for you where food has intersected with your travels or your global experiences?
Oh, that's a really big, that could be an entire like 45-minute thing on its own.
Like a whole tour portion, a whole drash.
Right. And not just like a Shabbat drash, like a Rosh Hashanah drash, you know, like you're there for hours. I think, I mean, it's fascinating, right? You know, pre-COVID have just loved to travel immensely. And like, yeah, I've always liked to think of myself as a very curious person. And so I'm constantly like wanting to see other cultures and try other cuisines and, you know, try to figure it all out. And it's funny, my friend Tim, who's on this call, has actually been on many of these trips with me. And like, I would say the moment where travel and like food and like my personality and like values all sort of like came into like a perfect alignment. And it's not specifically Jewish. I mean, it was around Christmas time, so it's kind of pseudo-religious, but we were on a trip in Spain and we were in San Sebastian. And like, if you haven't been to San Sebastian, there's this old part of town that's walkable. There's no cars. It's all pedestrian roads. And essentially they have like Spanish tapas. We know what tapas are. They're prolific in the US these days, but like people in San Sebastian have turned it into like a verb, and it's called a tapeo. It's like to walk from one place to the other, having a bunch of tapas. And so it was this fun moment where I was like, wait, so you're telling me that I am actually encouraged to walk into this place, try one thing, and move on to the next place next door and try one thing, and then move on to the place after that and try one, like, this is my dream come true. And, you know, doing it with friends was like, all my meals are always with friends. Like I never think about like a fun celebratory meal and think, oh, it was me and like me. So, you know, it was fun to share that with, you know, with friends and like really get a chance to take it all in and just enjoy it. All right, so the yeast is done.
Ooh, perfect
If
timing.
you, I know. Well, I felt the watch vibrating and I quickly was like, oh, I gotta wrap this up. So now I'll lower this a little, and you can see that it's a little creamier. There's more bubbles. It's a little like a bit more viscous. And so this is the moment that you're actually ready and prepared to make challah. So I will actually bump this up a little and ask you a quick question, Molly. Do you want me to like start putting in?
Yeah,
things?
let's do it. I think
All
like,
right.
yeah, let's do it.
Okay. And do you want to watch me put in the things?
Yes, let's see what it looks
Okay.
like when it gets put in the container.
Perfect. So again, the recipe that was sent out makes a really big, two really big one, halot. So I've cut it down by a third, and it's no, like if you have the recipe, you'll see that it takes 3 eggs. So it's no surprise that I have found a way to cut this down by a third because it's easier to say 1 egg instead of half an egg. So at this point, we would put in the 1 egg. The teaspoon of salt. And, you know, this is where I do sound a little bougie. I definitely think great products will create a great end product. And so I prefer to use Maldon salt because it's lighter, it's flakier, it gives it a nicer like saltiness than just like any salt, but honestly, any salt will do. And then the 1/8 cup of the olive oil goes in. And so at this point, I need to. So I will then attach the paddle to this just to get it sort of mixed up. And so basically at this point, you want to mix it up so that obviously the egg breaks up. You mix in all of the ingredients and it'll start looking just like a brownish, yellowish cream, I guess. Yeah, I mean, it's probably a little difficult to see. I really need like 3 cameras. But basically now we are ready to proceed. And I will actually change the paddle. And like, I don't really consider this cheating, my friends. So then I'll put the kneading attachment on. And what I love about dividing this recipe into thirds is that it's like 1 egg, you had the 1/8 cup of the olive oil, and now you put in 2 cups of flour. And this is actually kind of a, not super technical, but I wouldn't dump all of the flour in at one time because then it gets a little challenging to work with. So in this case, I would say let's put in about half of the flour, maybe a little more than half. And then just slowly mix that in. And Molly, if you have any questions, this might actually be an interesting time just because watching dough knead is not that fun.
Great, I love it. You said this a little bit at the beginning, but also I'm just like in the middle of also mixing mine, and it's quite an experience right now. But you talked about how challah like served as this moment of grounding for you, and I just wanted to like ask you to expand a little bit more on like what role challah has played in your life.
Yeah, I think of all of the Jewish markers of time that we use. Shabbat is one that, you know, it comes every week. Some people might like it, some people might find it a little mundane. It's actually my favorite Jewish holiday, followed by Passover for a number of reasons. Like, I think I just like the eating
Me
moments.
too!
And so, but I think the fun part about challah, and I apologize, like I'm on my dining table, which I thought was sturdier, so now my camera's shaking while anyways. Challah is interesting, and I've been thinking about this a lot since you and I had a call a few weeks ago. Oddly enough, we start Shabbat with a number of things, including a braided piece of bread or a loaf of bread. And then fascinatingly, we end Shabbat with a braided candle. And like, after you and I mentioned that, I was like, wait a minute, there's something there, right? Like in Judaism, nothing is like accidental, really. Somebody has thought this through. I've asked a lot of my rabbi friends, and oddly enough, nobody has thought about it. And so I was, you know, riffing on it. And I think in addition to the fact that baking challah is really meditative for me, I'm reminded of this line by Ahad Aman, who said, and I actually had to write it down, more than Jews have kept Shabbat, Shabbat has kept the Jews. And so it's one of these interesting moments where and there's a paper here somewhere, so verbal NDAs all around. I want to be the first person to write it. But I think the idea of this, Shabbat has been here before I existed, and it'll be here after I'm not here.
No, we're gonna keep campaigning. We're gonna do it in the classroom.
And Shabbat sort of has held our ancestors. It will hold our descendants. It's something that grounds us. It's something that separates us, I think, from a lot of people. Not that I'm trying to promote Jewish exceptionalism by any stretch, but I think the idea of a braid, it's sort of like the idea of like the infinity symbol, right? And so I think that's the reason why we might start Shabbat with the braid and end Shabbat with the braid. But I think for me, when like pre-COVID, I would have Shabbat dinners, and it was like, I don't know, whoever needed a dinner, basically, right? So it could be 6 of you that weekend, or it could be 10 of you. So I would bake these 2 giant loaves of challah, and it takes a while and it takes time, and you have to like dedicate yourself to making it, because you have to set the yeast, then you have to wait for that, then you have to start adding in the ingredients, then you have to knead it, then you have to mix it, and then you have to let it rise for 2 hours. And sure, there's time to like do other things while it rises, but then you have to come back and you have to braid it, and you have to, so like it's a commitment. And what I think I love about it is it forces, at least for me, it forces me to say, okay, it's Friday afternoon, the week has been whatever the week has been, whether it's good or bad or indifferent. And now I'm like preparing gradually into this other period of time. And I think that's why challah is so important for me, and why, like, Molly was not kidding. There literally is a new picture of challah every week on my Instagram. And since we've been in shelter in place, I feel like my Instagram has turned into a challah Instagram, which I'm not too angry about, but yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. I want to respond to that. And also, there's someone in the chat who would love if you could show the dough and what it's looking like in the mixer, just so that they can see if it's matching up with them. Awesome. Thanks. Yeah, I just like, I want to echo some of the things that you said. I mean, when we were talking about this before this particular call, one of the things that really resonated, and I think you kind of like elevated that just now, is like the preparation that goes into the making of the challah. And like, then when it's done, it's like, okay, it's time to rest. It's time for Shabbat. Like, this preparation of the bread allows us to slow down and allows us to start like welcoming in Shabbat before it even comes. And I just like really loved when you shared that. So thank you, Rabbi Angel.
No problem.
There's also a few other questions. A few other questions in the chat. How do you know when to add the eggs, the olive oil, and the salt? Like, what should the mix
Great
look
question.
like?
I'm sorry, I should have. So basically, after you've waited the 10, in the recipe I say 10 to 15. Ideally, I like to wait 15 minutes, because then I feel like the yeast has fully consumed all of the sugar that went into the mixture, and then that really gives it a time to like activate. And so essentially, after the 15 minutes are done, you can immediately just add in, I don't know why. For some reason, I always do the egg first, then I do the salt, and then I do the olive oil. And essentially, they all go in together, and then you mix that until everything starts looking a little creamier. Yeah.
Cool.
Did that
Cool.
answer? I hope that answered your questions.
I
I also
think so.
realized I didn't set my oven, so.
And if anyone else has questions on process, feel free to write them in the chat and I will elevate them as they come. Yeah, awesome. What's your status on your dough looking like? Should I ask another question? Should we go to the next step? What's feeling good?
My dough is done. And like, again, this is not super scientific, but like basically I know my dough is ready when, I'll actually show you all. When it's like a little pillow, it's like a firm little pillow, and it doesn't like,
Oh no, I think we lost Angel. Oh, probably the computer screen shut. Hold on, we'll get him back. So bear with me. Oh,
sorry, I'm back.
I was like, did you shut the laptop? Is that what happened?
That's exactly what happened. But basically, it's like a firm pillow, and it doesn't really stick to you. And that's how you know that the dough is ready. And so at this point, you would let the dough rise for, and this is also, it depends on where you are, your humidity, your altitude, all of these fun things. So in the recipe, I say 30 minutes to 2 hours. I've never actually done it for less than an hour. And so now I will set this aside, let it do its thing, and quickly wash my hands. But Molly, if you have a question or two.
Well, while you're washing your hands, I am curious, you showed us how to do it with a mixer, and if someone at home, say me, is doing it sans mixer, at some point it gets kind of hard to like mix it all together. When do you start getting your hands in there? Like how does that work?
I would say with the proportions I'm using today, I would mix it with a spoon for the first cup of flour. And then when I add in the second cup of flour, I would then spoon it a little bit, enough so that the extra flour starts to get absorbed into the ball, but like not so far that you're like working your arm muscles. And that's when you like dig in with your hands and start mixing it. Yeah. If you're making the full recipe, I would say at about cup number 4 of flour, 4 to 5, that's when you start kneading it.
Cool. Awesome. Okay, my last question before I really am very excited to see your braiding technique. If you could plan your dream Shabbat dinner, which 3 people, like living, not living, ancestral, fictional, real, who would you invite and what would be the menu?
Oh man. Molly.
And like, I know that I'm at the table, but like, you can leave me off for now.
This is one of those moments where I'm like, I wish I would have been one of those like prima donnas who's like, I need to see all the questions you're gonna ask me before. Who would be at my table? I would say, this is one of those questions that also like you immediately get to know somebody because you're like, wait, you would invite those people? Interesting. Wait, Jewish or not Jewish? Does it matter?
It doesn't matter, but the setting is a Shabbat dinner.
Right.
So okay. Like anyone could be there. Yeah.
3 people. I mean, for sure, my mother. Yeah. I would also think like Herzl would be kind of interesting to have at my Shabbat dinner, right? Like the founder of what we consider the Zionist movement today, who actually never got to go to Israel or Palestine. So like, that'd be fascinating, right? And I need a third. This is a tough one. This is a really tough one. And you know what? I would say Rabbi Lou, who I converted with, because he was amazing.
Wow, I would love to know what your mom would say to Theodore Herzl. Like, really curious.
She would probably be like, you do what? Yeah, shave your beard. It's a little long. She would be very not impressed.
And what would you make?
What kind of movement? Oh, what would I make? Now that's an easier question. I definitely would enlist my mother, and I think we would go through and find all of basically my childhood favorite dishes that she would make, which are very like, you know, she was from Panama, my dad's from Puerto Rico, very similar cuisines. I like to joke that we're basically the same people except different beans. But like, I think, you know, the matzo ball soup for sure, my brisket for sure. And from there, then I would be like, okay, mom, like, I need like a fun starch. And that's where we would probably break out one of what I feel like millions of rice recipes that she had that included all sorts of things. But in Panama, I would say there's this one in particular that's kind of like, it's kind of like a yellow rice with little, what are the beans? They look like little lentils, but they're not lentils. They're like in the kidney bean family. Not quite capers, no. Anyways, in Spanish, in Panama, we call them porotos. I don't know the translation in English. I apologize. Yeah, but I would definitely start infusing interesting flavors into the meal. And I know like my mom and Rabbi Lou would be down, and Teddy's would have to like just deal.
I love that. I love it so much. Put him in his place, you know?
I mean, yeah.
Cool. Do you want to show us the braiding technique now? Should we dive in?
Sure. Yeah, no, this is the moment I've been waiting for, because it kind of reminds me of all those cooking shows I watched as a kid where magically things were already done. And I was like, how did they do that? So my dough has risen. And now the fun part is, and this dough I prepared earlier, and it was, it's been rising for 2 hours and 38 minutes. And you notice it looks like a light pillow. It's very airy. And then the minute you like touch it, it starts deflating. And that's fine, that's good. So what I'll do now is I actually do a little bit of dusting of flour just so that it doesn't stick. And for those of you watching at home, yes, I clean the table properly and thoroughly before I do this. Normally I'm on my kitchen counter. So then you just have this little ball of dough, and it's very light and it's pliable. And let's hope I don't knock the screen down again. So at this point, what I like to do, I do a 6-strand braid. And so I sort of roll it out so that it's kind of like a tube, not perfect by any means, because, you know, who wants perfectly braided or perfectly formed bread? And so it's a little narrower on the ends. And since I do cut on my counter, I don't actually want to cut my table up. So what I'll do then is I'll cut some little discs out of it to start preparing. Did I do the math right here? 2, 3, 4, 5. No, but 5 is fine. It still works the same. And then at this point, you start to sort of, not sort of, but you roll it out into a length. And so a fun fact about this particular moment is I'm making 2 loaves, but it's actually going to be one giant one that I just cut down the middle and then reform the ends, because I found that that little cheat is actually really nice and helpful and creates big, beautiful, uniformed challah. And so I'll just keep doing this for a while. Actually, do you want to chat with me while I do this?
Yeah, I do. It's my dream to always be chatting with you, actually.
Mine too.
Yeah, I guess I'm curious, like going back a little bit, you mentioned some of the work that you're doing with the Jews of Color Initiative, and I'm curious if you want to talk a little bit more about like what people should be like putting their attention to right now? Like, what is sitting with you, and what's feeling called to be, where should we be calling ourselves right now?
Yeah, no, that's actually a really good question. I think, so how to answer that, and also know that this is being recorded and I don't want to say something dumb. I think an interesting moment that I've noticed recently is that this moment in our time feels very different from other moments. There have been other moments of, outcry, other moments of people standing up for Black lives and that sort of thing. But never, I think, until now, have you seen such a concerted effort to actually say and believe that Black lives matter. And I think that's a very important and interesting moment. And I know it's a tough one for a lot of the Jewish community. And I'm not sure why, to be honest with you, because I get this question a lot. Well, but Black Lives Matters, what about their Palestine-Israel policy? I'm like, well, first of all, you're talking about the other movement, which is the movement for Black lives. So therefore, there should be no reason why we don't say that Black Lives Matter matters, because we wouldn't say Jewish lives matter only if somebody then supports this other thing. But I would also say it's been fascinating, right? Because I think nationally, this moment we're noticing that the Jewish community, I think, is finally coming to terms with the fact that we're not all descendants of, Eastern European Jews, that we're not all, we don't all have the Holocaust as a shared tragedy and a shared story. And I'm not belittling the Holocaust by any stretch of the imagination, but there are other bad things that have happened to a number of our people. And I think it's fascinating to watch as we come to terms with that. And what does that mean, right? I think this, early on, I sort of alluded to it because I even do it. Like when we talk about Jewish food, right? We always say, oh, well, obviously it's a brisket and it's matzo ball soup and it's gefilte fish and it's, the tzimmetz and all of that stuff. But no, that's not Jewish food if you were born in, pick anywhere, right? Outside of Europe. So I think those are things to highlight. I also think another thing to keep in mind and to really pay attention to, there are a lot of emerging Jews of color organizations that do really badass work. And for whatever reason, we tend to pay attention. And I've been on this kick lately, and I don't mean to call them out, and I'm not doing it because I have any issues with them. But like the Jewish farming community, we are all about farming, right? And doing the outdoors in a Jewish way. But like, until the world has just as many Jews of color led initiatives as there are Jewish farming and Jewish outdoor initiatives, I don't think the Jewish community is actually where it needs to be. And so that's been an interesting thing. And I think I'll end and say, I think we need to all start paying a little more attention to who is actually in our Jewish community and who isn't. Because we know from our study that at least 1 million of American Jews are Jews of color, which means 1 in basically every million should have a Jew of color in it, 1 in 7 American Jews. And if they don't have one, then you have some issues and you should ask yourself why they're not there. But I also think, aside from Jews of color, we also know, and this is not even our study, this is just national data, that 1 in 5 American Jewish households has a person of color in it. So if you have a B'nai Mitzvah cohort and like all the parents that show up are white, you're like, wait a minute, there's something going on here, right? So, sorry, I got a little heated.
Please never apologize for anything, but especially not for this. The Torah that you just shared with us is so important, and I'm so grateful that you brought words to all of those thoughts and shared them with us. So thank you, and retweet every day. We have a request to show the dough where you're at in the stage now. Just show us your logs.
So I am actually on the last one right now.
Wow, that was perfect timing. You must have planned.
The last one is a little longer than the others, but you know what, friends? It's perfectly fine. So now what I will do is, this is the fun part. I don't know how I learned to do this particular style of braid, but no, we're all gonna learn it together. So what I do is, normally I would have 6 strands, and I would have 3 on either side. This time I have 5, which happens to me more often than I would like to admit. And so I'll have 3 on one side and 2 on the other. And essentially at the top, which you can't really see, and I apologize, because if I did show you the top, then we'd have me leaving the Zoom again. I just pinch it together until it sort of forms like a more unified blob, if you will. So it is all one piece at the top. And actually I can show you this in just a second. There we go. So you see that it's sort of all right there, all one piece. And then from here, I will hope that the laptop doesn't fall over. So I start from the outside in is the style of braid that I do. And so because I'm right-handed, I tend to always start from the right. And then, so the outside braid came in to the middle. So now the outside braid on the left comes across to the middle. And I'm very OCD. You don't have to be. I think it's probably best not to be. So you'll see me rejiggering the lengths constantly. So then again, we'll repeat it, right side in towards the middle, then left side in to the middle. And then you just keep doing that over and over. One of the styles I will say as I do this is I'm gonna experiment in the next few weeks with round braiding, because I feel like that's a style I should know just in general. And because, you know, if we're in pandemic for Rosh Hashanah, I wanna have a round challah, damn it.
Wow, I can't wait to see your round challah experiments. I'm so pumped.
I know, you and me both. All right. So once you start getting to the end, it's always it's a judgment call really on how far you want to go. And I'll show you what I mean by that. So like I have this tiny little nubbing here. So luckily challah dough is sort of flexible. So I'll pull it over, but at this point, I'll come over one more. And then I'll do the same thing I did at the beginning and just sort of form it all. And it's not very elegant, but it bakes and looks beautiful. So there we have the full challah.
Wow.
And so, you know, for Shabbat, we need, well, you don't need, I follow the practice of having 2 challah. So I just sort of look at it and go, all right, that seems about the middle. And then you sort of rebraid a little bit. And then I do this pinching thing, and like people are gonna call me out on it someday, I'm sure. But like I pinch it until it becomes a proper like little end where you can't really tell where one end starts and one end begins. And I put it over there. And then I'll do the same to this one. I also, so background friends, I'm also, I have a background in graphic design, which is where my OCD comes into play, or like my obsession with wanting it to be perfect, not OCD. And so I like to tuck the ugly bits underneath. And so now we end up with the 2 challah, ready for the oven.
So beautiful.
And there is, and this is completely optional and you can decide to do it or not. A lot of people do an egg wash. I do an egg wash. Basically what I did is I took 1 yolk of an egg and I diluted it actually a little bit with about a tablespoon of water, just because I don't like a really, really dark wash. And then you simply brush it on to your challah. If you don't have a brush, I have used paper towels, I've used my hands. I think everyone is probably noticing that I am a bit of a kitchen geek. Like I will buy kitchen gadgets before I buy furnishings for the rest of my apartment. So once you do one, and I actually made a little extra. So I will not actually be using all of it for these two, but I will use it for the other two that are waiting. And there's, again, no real scientific part to this, I don't think. I like to just brush it on and make it into the, all the nooks and crannies and the cracks and the ends. And so what I'll do next is, because I've been doing a lot of different types of challah, well, raisin and all sorts of things. So this week, one of my challah is actually going to be a everything but the bagel challah.
So fun!
And if you had poppy seeds or sesame seeds, this is a good time to sprinkle them on. I sprinkle very generously, for better or for worse.
Tell me where that everything but the bagel seasoning is from, though. Real question.
Trader Joe's has one. I ordered this at the very beginning of pandemic just on Amazon. It says it's SPQR seasoning.
Cool.
And it has, it literally is everything. Where's the sesame seeds, sea salt, flakes, minced garlic, dried minced onion, black sesame seeds, and poppy seeds. So it really is a little bit of everything. Perfect. And at this point, it will go into the oven. And this is the part that really, friends, it depends on you, your oven, and all of that fun stuff. I have learned that in my new oven here in LA, it's literally 20 minutes. But I also know that one half of my oven is significantly warmer than the other half of my oven. Gotta love apartment living. So I set a timer for 10 minutes, and so I put it in, and then 10 minutes in, I turn it so that one challah doesn't get overdone. And if you're like me and forget to pull things that you store in your oven, perfectly fine too. So let me set a timer before I forget. Perfect. All right.
Awesome.
So now we wait. Or not. I haven't been paying attention to our time, Molly.
Well, we're pretty close to the end of our journey together, which is great because we just finished braiding the challah. And I'm curious, just for like a final question for you, what's next? Like, what's next for you? What are you up to? How's like your time going to be spent? What's our call to action? Any of the above?
All of it. Well, what's next? Like literally like base level. I am going to clean up the mess, and I'm having a Zoom dinner with two of my best friends who live in San Diego this evening. So that's literally what's next. But what's next? I mean, at work, we're always busy, always planning new adventures. We're currently recruiting for 2 new positions, a program officer and a communications associate. So one call to action would be if you know anybody that falls into either one of those camps, send them our way. And I also, I'll add a little like, I'm proud that we're at a moment that we're hiring more people. Our initiative is only 3 staff people and we're expanding to 5. And it feels like such a good and beautiful thing to especially be expanding, especially in spite of a pandemic, in spite of economic downturns, in spite of all of these things. It's like, Dafka, we need more people, and so we're hiring more people. So that is really good. I feel great about that. And then longer term, we're just keep an eye on us. There's a lot of fun projects coming out of the G's of Color initiative that I think a lot of people will want to know about, participate in. Yeah, and if you have fun challah ideas, I'm always down for trying new things. Molly and I are actually gonna have a date soon because I have a sourdough starter that I think I might have killed and I'm not sure. But my next project, aside from learning how to braid round challah, is I wanna do sourdough challah. I'm from San Francisco. It's sort of something I should have already known to do. So yeah, that's next.
I cannot wait for a sourdough challah. That sounds like the best thing ever. Angel, Thank you so much for joining us, so much for being vulnerable and honest and sharing about your Jewish journey and like what is pressing and weighing on you and like where your heart is right now. I feel so grateful for everyone on this call. Angel and I have been like scheming to figure out a way that we could do a program together for basically since we've met. So this also feels like such the share it moment for me of like, we did it. So thank you so much. To close us out, if you enjoyed this segment, we are going to be rolling out a culinary Jewish deep dive once a month as part of this new segment, EntwineNosh. So we will send out more information for our August segment soon. And all of this is actually culminating in something that we're super excited about, which is a crowdsourced cookbook. Where we're going to have Entwine alumni from all over the world submitting recipes from their global communities, from their families, to really capture, again, this like mosaic of Jewish experience through food in one place. And so keep an eye out for that too. And all of the people who we're going to be highlighting on this segment are going to be folks whose recipes are going to be featured in that cookbook as well. If you want to keep up with Entwine generally, you can check out the thread, which Shauna will post in the chat right now, and that's where we have all of our programs that are happening virtually. And other than that, thank you all so much for joining us, and I hope you have a sweet challah and a great rest of your week. Bye.